Hey guys, so what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, I thought we'd have a little bit of discussion on Warcry. Some first impressions, as I've had a few games now, and I think it's about time we had a little bit of discussion on it. And while we do that, I thought it'd be really fun to paint this Tarantulos Brood Master, I think he's called. And we wanted to do this one for a while, so I thought we'd have a go at it. And using the techniques that I've shown on the channel, so limited palettes, a lot of neutral blacks and blue blacks and these kinds of colors, we're going to do some redback type Tarantulas Brood. So, I'm Australian, that's, redbacks are here, and I thought that'd be a really fun one to try to mix some of those colors. So for the blacks around the face, the sort of the spider elements, do a really sort of shiny black, and put the little red marking in maybe somewhere there, or use it as a spot color for some of the clothing, etc. So we'll see how it goes, but I think it should be really fun to do a sort of a redback type brood pack. I think that'll be really cool. So we're going to have a go at that, and you'll see the colors as we go, but it should be a fun one. I don't have a full plan for it, but I think we can come up with something pretty fun together. And while I do that, we'll have a bit of a discussion on this whole Warcry thing, eh? So Warcry. First impressions. Well, I've played a couple of games of it now, one in the previous version of Warcry and one in the current version. And, there's some marked differences, not so much with the rules, but certainly with the warbands. And we'll move into that as we talk about this. And I guess the first thing we'll talk about is, the sort of experience when you set up and get into it. And it does have a very similar feeling to something like Underworlds or from Atomic Mass Games, MCP, Marvel Crisis Protocol, or even to some extent Shatterpoint. It's this kind of level of skirmish game, and I'll do my best not to compare it too much to those games from Atomic Mass Games because I don't know whether it's a fair comparison. Warcry is definitely its own game and it has its own sort of flavor and style, but it is quite easy to sort of compare it to something like MCP, which is sort of like doing Warcry but on a slightly more amped up level, or like a hybrid of between Warcry and Underworlds, with a kind of just a lot more, I guess, optionality for list making and so on, and some of the tactics that then play out because of that. So it's a bit of an unfair thing to put Warcry up against that when it's really trying to be a slightly different game. You could be tricked into thinking it might be more like Wartime, for those that are old enough to remember that game or know of that game. But it's really not that much like Wartime, except for the fact that obviously the setting is a Warhammer setting, not the same one, but still something made by GW, so it has a certain look and flavor to it. And you are using a skirmish type warband, but there are some marked differences, and both from list writing and also the gameplay itself. So what's that first experience when you sit down? You do notice that it is actually on quite a small area. So it has one of those fold out cardboard boards, which I think is it's like a 2 foot by 1 foot, or a 2 foot by something, 2 foot by 2 foot, or something like that. It's small anyway. It's one of those little half ones that they do, and that immediately is interesting because you can play it on a smaller table. And so the first time I had a go at this, I was like, this is pretty good. You can have your drink next to you, you can be chatting with your friend, and that was kind of cool. I liked that, and the amount of terrain that you had wasn't a huge amount, so you could set it up, and it was relatively easy to get going, and that's what I noticed first of all. But then we got to the gameplay. Now the gameplay was interesting and fun, but as I said, I played one of the older edition, and in that time, when they made rules for the main factions of AOS to play inside of Warcry, and not just the Warcry main factions, which, if you don't know, Warcry is sort of set around the 8 points in the Age of Sigmar world, and all the Chaos warbands and so on that fight over territory and so on like this, or at least that's what I'm led to believe. And so it was all sort of Chaos warbands initially. But then they released rules for Age of Sigmar main factions, so things like Stormcast, etc. And that was the warband that I took. I made a Stormcast warband. And that game was really interesting. It certainly, I think anyone that's played Warcry from that time knows that the main factions were a bit overpowered and weren't really balanced with the Chaos warbands. And most people came to the decision that if you're going to play Warcry, you either played with only the Chaos warbands or you played with only the AOS faction, main faction warbands, and you didn't really mix them because it made for a bit of an unfair pairing. And that's exactly what I experienced. So, you know, the gameplay was sort of, some sort of hybrid between Underworld's, you know, MCP and maybe a little dash of Mordheim thrown in there. You know, your alternate activations, you've got these dice that you can then pair up to do certain abilities, sort of in the same way that you're amassing you know, power and so on in MCP to do your superpowers and so on like that, but a little bit different mechanic. But you know, you're sort of doing this sort of resource management there, or at least deciding which way you're going to go, setting up for big plays, etc., on a relatively tight area. And so in that way, it's kind of similar to MCP. And so, yeah, we set up and everything was fine. But then what I noticed is that the Stormcast, which was what I was using, just didn't die. You know, I mean, it might have been the choice that I was taking, but I think I had an Annihilator on there or something like that, and that was literally unkillable. I think I had 2 of them, and I didn't really realize at the time just how powerful this was going to be. You know, and really, I never felt threatened through the whole game. So it was a bit of I guess a bad start, because I didn't really get to see the nuance in the game when I began. So we played it out and all of that, and obviously the Stormcast won, and that was the kind of discussion I had after it. I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. I'd like to see more, but it does feel like there's some imbalances here. And then obviously we had the discussion of, you know, the fact that the AOS factions weren't quite balanced with the Chaos ones. And so next time around, it's now another edition of Warcry, I think the current one that's now in place. And, you know, I got these Tarantulos Brood little warband. You know, I got a Chaos warband. And so I was playing against the Corvus Cabal, which is the sort of the Birdmen, if you don't know which one that is. And now I saw really how Warcry plays. And yeah, very interesting. So my initial impressions are that it is a fun game, and it is definitely interesting. There are some elements of it that I would like to see possibly improved, and of course I've only played a couple of games now, so that one and now one in the new ones. I've got to play a few more before I give final sort of more definite answers to these kind of impressions or feelings towards certain way of thinking about Warcry. But I did notice that your warband definitely has a very sort of narrow way it plays. It doesn't really have a lot of flexibility, at least of the warbands that I've seen so far play. They can't really step outside the box. They have their set of abilities that they can use with the dice, and that kind of dictates a lot about how they work, plus their weapons they're carrying, etc., and anything that's on their card. And so they really can't do anything else but that. So in the case of the Tarantulas Brood, they're sort of taking wounds and dishing wounds back. So it's kind of, but on a very sort of fragile frame. So it's kind of like a glass cannon style of warband, but where you're attempting to damage back as you get damaged. And so it's this very, very tight sort of tightrope walk kind of warband. And on the other side, the Corvus Cabal, which I think is probably one of the best, mainly because of all of the movement it has, and one of its characters that can, you know, move very fast, the one with the wings. And so they're able to really move around the board quite quickly. Now the spider guys do have some level of ability to do that too. They've got a little bit of that maneuverability, but not quite as much as something like Corvus. So, you know, you're playing this game and you're seeing how it works, and you're starting to see the where your deficiencies are, but you don't really have any way to plug that gap. You know, you don't have any way to you know, shore up those weaknesses, because there isn't really a way to ally in other models. You do have some ability to do that, mercenaries and so on. There are some models that you can ally into your warband or change the configuration, but it is relatively limited as far as I know so far, unless someone can tell me otherwise. But you really can't, like, let's say you like the Corvus Cabal, you can't like grab a few of those minis and put them into your warband with your spider guys, right? You're sort of separated out. And I would love to see some sort of allying system in this game to allow you a bit more flexibility with list writing. And this is where the comparison to MCP comes in. Because of MCP's wide flexibility in terms of your list writing, you can put any of the characters with any of them. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should be able to do that in Warcry, but some level of, let's say, small percentage of the number that are in your warband could come from another one, or a small group of other warbands would be really interesting, right? You can imagine the diversity and difference you would get with warband creation if you, let's say, you were allowed to take like 3 from one, or it had to be less than 50% from another faction. You couldn't take any of the leaders, etc., but you could take some of the other characters in that warband. There'd be some really fun dynamics and synergies that you could create with that, just as you get with MCP. MCP has a wide variety of characters that do a lot of things, and the kinds of lists that you can write with that is almost infinite. And it's what makes MCP so satisfying to play, because you can really create different lists constantly and play very, very differently each time. And that keeps it really fresh and keeps it interesting. And I think that's where the power of MCP comes from, is that list writing and that ability to change out and manipulate the game in that way. And something like that, not quite as heavy as that, but a small amount of that would be really lovely to see in Warcry, because the Warcry models themselves don't really have a lot of options on their card in order to change weapons and so on, like you would have with something like Mordheim, where Mordheim, you have tons of options, just like Necromunda, to kit out your character in different ways, gain loot along the way, etc., and have different weapons, abilities, and so on that really change how the character is. In Warcry, they're very fixed, so that's that narrowing of tactics and gameplay style that I was talking about, and I think that's where that's where there's a potential there for improvement. I'd love to do a campaign, let's say, a homebrew campaign, where you allow for some of these allying in, to see how that opens up the game to more possibilities with the one warband, right? But this isn't a gripe of the game or a negative that I see in it. It's trying to be its own thing, and that's why I said initially comparing it to MCP is a little bit unfair, because it really is trying to do something else. It's not really trying to be that game, or it's not trying to be Underworld, it's not trying to be Mordheim or Necromunda or any of those games. It really is trying to give its own flavour, and I think it does do that. I think it does definitely create its own vibe and its own style of gameplay, and I'm sure that there are a lot of tactical choices you can make and variations you can do as you play more games of this. And so I'm definitely going to continue that and explore the depth that the game has, and try out maybe the concept is more that you have maybe a couple of warbands on your roster, and you sort of juggle between those over the course of games to sort of get that variety going. And that might be how they want you to do it, right? To buy more so that you have more minis, right? But I'll continue and see how I feel about it. It might just be that, my initial game was maybe the mission wasn't quite right, or those sorts of things that sort of gave me that sort of sense of restriction to my warband. So on the other side, my impressions of the Corvus Cabal was very different. I was seeing wonderful flexibility there and all of the abilities they could do. It might just be I need to pick a warband that's closer to the gameplay style that I like, and that's with any war game, right? You slowly learn what your what your tactical leniencies are, and then you find the factions and the armies that suit that, and that gives you a more satisfying game overall. So yeah, I'm certainly interested to keep going, and in the club I'm part of, they're now starting to get a bit interested in it. So there are a couple of guys that are wanting to play it. So I will definitely get more opportunity to play some more Warcry, and we'll revisit it again in some time to come, and go through it again and see if I've altered my position, my initial impressions, or whether they've improved, degraded, etc. And we'll go through it together, because I think it is a really fun game, and I think it's one that's worth having a go at if you're interested. It's very easy to get into. Now we look at sort of the cost side of this. So Warcry has seen some really great starter boxes, these sort of FOMO boxes that come out, and it's some really beautiful minis, being delivered with those boxes. We've seen Stormcast, Flesh Eater Courts, etc., the Seraphon. They're all really, really beautiful, and and they have great rules for Age of Sigmar as well, which is interesting, right? There's actually quite a few of the Warcry warbrands. A lot of them actually have quite solid rules for Age of Sigmar, especially that Stormcast one, the Soulsworn Coven. I think that's what it's called. They're very, very good if you're playing Stormcast, just incidentally. And the Flesh Eater Courts one is amazing. So if you don't know about those, go and take a look, because they are very, very good. And the terrain that comes with them is awesome. If you've been buying some of these over the course of Warcry's history, you'll have a really great collection of both terrain and warbands to play around with. And I have noticed that there's been a trend towards main faction warbands currently with the Warcry that offerings that have been released. But I would still love them to continue with some of those Chaos ones, and they have done it. The Khorne one, there's been a few, but I have noticed quite a few main faction warbands come out recently, and that's totally fine. It's broadening the scope, and I guess that's a good thing, because as I alluded to before, the previous edition where you had those mainline factions, they were a bit imbalanced. So making specific warbands of those main factions for Warcry specifically, so that they're given a rule set that's more in line with the rest of the game, is probably a good thing overall. So yeah, cost. I mean, it doesn't take much. You have one of those big boxes and you're ready to go. I'm pretty sure with Warcry still, you can actually download the rules and all of the warband sheets and everything like that. All the various paraphernalia that comes with Warcry. You can I think they still give that for free to download from the Warhammer community website. I'm pretty sure that's still available. So it is one of those games where they do actually offer some free downloads there for which is unusual for Games Workshop generally. But they do that with Warcry. So it is a relatively easy game to get into, and that's really important. I'm pretty sure, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case, that you can still get all that information, and that's really good. So that means you can get started. You don't need much. You just need a warband or a couple of warbands and a couple of friends to muck around with, and you can get started. And I think that's one of the real benefits of Warcry, really, and other skirmish games like this, where the entry point is a lot lower and a lot easier for someone who's just curious about the game or curious about wargaming in general, to get into the game and start having a bit of fun. So yeah, I think that's where we'll leave it. I'm very happy I've played those games and got that impression down and had a chance to try it out. And I'm definitely curious to go further and see what kind of impressions I could get out of the game, or just what sort of fun is in this game. And for those that have experiences that they want to share, put them down in the comments. That'd be great. I'd love to hear about it. But let's take a look and see how I've gone with this Tarantulos Brood Master, or whatever he's called, and we'll see if I've locked down that sort of redback color scheme, because I think it's going to be really cool. And there we go, one Broodmaster, all done. Let's take a look. So yeah, this was a bit of fun. It's not quite a redback, but it's close. We've got the little red marking in the head there and that sort of thing. It's pretty cool. I think it's worked out. We've got the spot color of red and the teals as a contrasting color, all the neutrals and so on in the cape and around the head. Yeah, I think it was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to playing a little bit more of Warcry in the future. So these are only my first impressions. I'm sure I'm going to develop some more ideas on this as I go. Maybe use some more warbands, that sort of thing, but this one was really fun, and I can't wait to get these on the board again and try them a little bit more and try to see if I can get more out of them, because yeah, they are really fun models. I really did enjoy painting this one, so I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll leave a nice image for him at the end, as I normally do, and the paint list and so on, because it is really fun. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe button, it really helps me out, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one.